Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is another Hip Hop Now Podcast bonus episode, specifically designed to keep you caught up or entertained about hip hop, music, and culture. It's the holiday season, so I typically tend to do a little bit more around the way of, special content. During one of my audio runs of this podcast, I spent a year doing numerous bonus episodes, which people tend to like because it kind of files down on one thing in particular. And today we're here to do something that, we've done pretty frequently, and it's a ranking the albums episode, right? We did one for Raekwon. We did one for Jay-Z and Nas at that point in time, Snoop Dogg, Redman and Method Man. You know what I'm saying? I've done a couple of these, Eminem included as well. The last episode I did was ranking De La Soul albums. Kind of went in conjunction with the interview I had over a De La Soul book. But now we're here to do one of the MCs who have been most influential, not only to me as an MC, but also as a hip hop fan and my palate for listening to hip hop. One of the GOATs, if we're just going to say that, because we're just going to do what the kids doing. One of the GOATs, Ice Cube. Now, I'm not going to hold y'all. For me, Ice Cube was my favorite rapper when he was in the group NWA. He also was my favorite rapper at that point in time. A lot of it has more so to do with the fact that, okay, put it like this, right? When it comes to basketball, I've probably had two favorite players in the history of the game. One being Anthony Hardaway. Like, I was a huge Penny Hardaway fan, like big time, right? But then obviously his career went where it went. And even though I watched the game and I had a favorite team, I was a Knicks fan back in the days and all that, I didn't have another favorite player until LeBron came into the league. And I was watching him in high school like, yo, he's going to be crazy. So he kind of became my favorite player to watch, right? And the same could be said in some ways for rap, right? At a point in time, certain artists that I like will like age out of being my favorite rapper because that's how hip hop was, right? 1 minute I'm enamored by Slick Rick, but he really only has one album. Then I'm a huge Kane fan, but he kind of falls off the map after 2 albums, right? Even though Taste of Chocolate wasn't that bad, y'all. Wasn't that bad. Not that bad. Wasn't that bad. Prince of Darkness, though. That was. Then it was Redman for a certain amount of time. Right now it's Kendrick. So I've had my favorites, but Ice Cube was an early one for me, mainly because the first Ice Cube album I purchased with my own money was Death Certificate. And when I say, it goes without saying how much that album impacted me personally. It really personally more than anything, and that influenced, how I rap, how I talk, how I carry myself, because it was just the way Ice Cube commanded your attention with his voice, with the sternness in his voice, with the production, with the topics he had, right? Like, I felt like I was learning a lot from Ice Cube. So Death Certificate is my favorite album all time. Like, I have a number of albums that I love that when I press play, it's like, listening for the first time. But if I had to pick one, most people know Death Certificate is that album for me. So I felt it was only right for those who don't know anything beyond Lethal Injection to do a tier list. Now, I'm not going to hold y'all. The majority of the albums in his catalog, which are kind of like 12, but we have a bonus here. We have a 13. I either heard at the time or didn't take the time to listen because of what I was hearing through the singles. And I just had chalked it up like, well, that run of Ice Cube albums that I was locked into been over. So why listen? And he just dropped a new album recently. So I felt like it was just. Now I'm going to only go over his solo albums. So no West Side Connection, no Gorillas in the Mist, nothing else but his solo projects, because truth be told, he has enough to do a quick tier list. And in usual Hip Hop Now podcast fashion, as you can see here, we don't just have the letter system, right? As far as the tiers, the S, the A's. No, no, no. We just don't have classic and bad and blah, blah. We have a tier system that reflects the artist. So starting at the top, which would be like a classic section, Once Upon a Time in the Projects. Yo, right? Right under that would be an album that's not considered a classic, but a great album. Straight Jacking. Jack the mother at the drive through. You get out the core, nigga, get your drink. All right. That's what that's what the second one is. Good album means Doughboy. I make dough, but don't call me Doughboy. This ain't no. All right. I'm in my Ice Cube bag. Then we start going down. An album that's not complete garbage, but it's headed there. Don Mega. Now I call that Don Mega because for me, with Ice Cube, that's when things start to go south, honestly. And a straight up whack album is a yay yay. I don't care what the cultural reference is. I hated when Ice Cube was doing that. And I had to go through all these albums. I had to relive that time, and you'll be surprised at my assumptions at the time don't really match me listening to some of this stuff now. So let's get started with his debut solo album, America's Most Wanted. We're not even gonna hold y'all. Once Upon a Time in the Projects, yo. Left NWA. What was it going to be like to hear Ice Cube without NWA? Even seeing him on a cover by himself didn't even make sense. But linking up with the Bomb Squad, and shout out to Kill of Apartment 5 B podcast, who pointed out how Dre's production on NWA mirrored the production of Public Enemy, right? The Bomb Squad kind of had that same vibe. And I think that's why early Ice Cube, particularly this joint, America's Most Wanted, worked so well because it was like he was getting the same production. Now, Ice Cube did say that when he left NWA, he was trying to get Dr. Dre to produce his solo album, but Easy and Ruthless Records were blocking it. Imagine that. Like, he still put out a classic with the Bomb Squad, because the Bomb Squad got some production classics under their belt also. But man, if it would have been Dre, who knows where we would be with this. Next up, he released the EP kind of in between Kill at Will. This is a classic. This is one of the greatest EPs ever. It's almost like it wasn't free, but it probably should have been a part of an album. Obviously, there's like some loosies, some different versions of songs that's on his debut, America's Most Wanted. But more importantly, the standout single, Jacking for Beats, is on Kill at Will, which is dope. And I always thought this album cover was dope. Like how he just like it's Kill at Will, but he's handing you the gat. Like, yo, I homie, going, you know what I'm saying? So for me, I was like, man, like Ice Cube is solidifying why he's one of my favorites out that group. And then he released his sophomore album, No Sophomore Jinx. It's another classic, Death Certificate. This album just isn't my favorite because of influence or my age at the time. Top to bottom, this is a great album in the same ways that America's Most Wanted is, but I think it's far more polished. and Sir Jinx plays a part. It just has a lot to it as far as a story being told about the neighborhood from beginning to end, from the gang violence to selling crack to being in the hood with stuff like steady mobbing, right? To going to the doctor's office, promiscuous women, also looking at us as a people, true to the game, people being sellouts, and top three disc record of all time, No Vaseline, where Ice Cube addressed his split with NWA and some of the disses they threw towards him on their sophomore album, Niggas for Life. So Death Certificate is an all-time classic, and Ice Cube first three shots is crazy. He's already at the top. Next up, his third album, which when I saw this in the record store, I almost feel, well, let's go back real quick just to make sense. I almost feel like it was released like the next year, if not a couple of months after Death Certificate. I don't know if it was because I was listening to Death Certificate for so long and so much that when a new album dropped, I felt like this one just came out. But that album being The Predator, which I'm going to give it a straight jacket. But the timeline is America's Most Wanted in 1990, Kill at Will in 1990, Death Certificate in 1991, The Predator in 1992. So that was the difference. A lot of people talk about Jay-Z's run and releasing an album every year. So did Ice Cube. And look what we got. We got 4 projects that are either classic or damn near classic from 1990 to 1992, which is crazy. And what I liked about The Predator the most, it was the album after the Rodney King riots, where Ice Cube basically was gloating off the fact that he predicted, what would happen. And there are a number of songs on here that speak to that. Probably the biggest singles from this album are Today Was a Good Day, which we all know, and Check Yourself with Das Effects, which was a hit. But that version of Check Yourself appeared on this bootlegs and B-sides, which I ain't gonna hold y'all. This is straight jacket. This was kind of like what Kill at Will had done, but there was probably more remixes and stuff like that, but it also contained records that wasn't on his albums, like The Product and 24 with an L. Just dope. Like that run in itself, right, of those projects from Ice Cube shows that he was in a zone. And again, releasing every year. Like, I guess you could say from 1991 to 1992. Well, no, 1990 to 1992, 3 years. Ice Cube was on top, and he was in the zone when it came to the albums. The next album releasing the next year in 1993 is Lethal Injection, and I'm gonna go Doughboy on this one. This is when it felt like some of what you had heard and loved from Ice Cube that leaned into gangster rap, a specific sound kind of situation. This was the album where it fell back a little bit. And I remember I thought this album was fake. I really thought this album was fake when I saw it. I'm like, Lethal Injection, and this don't even look real. Look at the cover. But it was a real Ice Cube album. He was literally dropping every year. And for those who don't know or wasn't around back then, that was like unheard of. Most artists in hip hop took 2 to 3 years, in some cases, maybe even more, but at least 2 years to release a follow-up album, whereas Ice Cube was dropping every year. And this is the album that had the song You Know How We Do It, which I thought was a highlight. This was Afro, huge Afro and shades Ice Cube, because he went through a couple of phases, right? Jerry Curl with the first 2 projects, then Muslim cut his hair with Death Certificate, and probably I think he still rocked that with the Predator. But Lethal Injection, this is when he had the big afro and the shades. And the videos was videos was kind of always the same. You know, you in the crib with the light that's only shining like here, and the helicopter light coming in every video. You know, the hands is like this. But even though it wasn't as good to me as the albums that came before, and I'm talking about you got 5 projects that you could just keep running back. This one took it down a notch in 1993 with Lethal Injection. Now is where things get really different because Ice Cube doesn't drop another album until 1998, and it's a double album. But so much has happened in between 93 and 98. That's 5 years. In 93, Wu-Tang hit the scene. In 94, you get Illmatic. And also 93, you get uh, Snoop, Doggy Style. And, you know, what I started to notice about Ice Cube, and I think some of it happened on the album Lethal Injection, but especially with the album I'm going to talk about now, is he started to do different. He started to experiment, if you ask me, with different styles of rapping over different styles of beats that didn't necessarily fit the formula we were accustomed to. Now, I get it. You would say, well, why can't he grow as an artist? And I agree, he can grow as an artist. But I didn't feel like he was the best at some of the things he was experimenting with. And I feel like this album in particular is more reflective of all of the later albums you get from Ice Cube. The formula started to be more of what's on this album versus during his classic period. And that album is War and Peace Volume 1. And I'm not going to hold y'all. Yay. This album garbage, y'all. Now, this album has some moments. Do not get it twisted. It's 18 tracks. It was a double CD back then. There are flashes of old Ice Cube on records. Like, honestly, if you filed this down to a good 12 songs, I think it would be a better album. But as a double album, he on the cover with the top hat, with the staff. And I don't even recognize who this is, but I get it. It was War and Peace. One thing I liked about it, it was thematic. So at first, when I first heard Ice Cube had a double album coming out, War and Peace Volume 1, I was there for it because I felt like with Lethal Injection, he had stepped into a different category with the experimenting with different beats, and I didn't kind of like it. And I thought it was a result of the Chronic releasing, like he was going for a more groovy sound than a more hard edge sound, which was cool. But when it came to War and Peace, this is when it was like Ice Cube was, I don't know, he was experimenting too much, and the whole yay, like he was Don Mega, like he was really pushing this as a marketing employee, and it just sounds stupid. And as a fan, I just wasn't there for it. Again, I'm coming off that early 90s run that's incredible to yay. So that album gets that. Now, 2 years later in 2000, he finally releases the follow-up, War and Peace Volume 2, the Peace Disc. And I ain't gonna hold y'all. That's more like it. This album, I had never heard. I had heard songs off of it, but the singles made me think it was more Don Mega yay. But it wasn't. It was actually good. It was more, you felt like more of the Ice Cube was back on this album. Now, this album did have the song You Could Do It, Put Your Back Into It from the Players Ball joint. But I kind of like that record. I think he got one off with the party records. I don't really like Ice Cube party records at all. But that one, I was like, that's cool. And this was a double album. But this, to me, the second half of War and Peace is way better. in its totality is way better than the volume one. So that was that. And honestly, when I was gearing up to do this, I didn't think either of those albums were going to be above anything garbage, but goes to show you, you go back and listen, then you remember like volume two wasn't that bad at all. So, but then we waited 6 years later on an independent label. Ice Cube came back with an album called Laugh Now, Cry Later. And I felt like he was back. He was starting to get back to form. So that joint is dope, boy. I liked it because it felt like old Ice Cube was back with the beats he chose, the subject matter. He had that, like, Ice Cube has always had that like tone of authority, right? When he's telling you about something. And I think most of his albums, the titles of songs reflected that. When he tried to have a little fun, I thought it was kind of corny. Not saying he can't have fun, but I just felt it a little bit corny. And Laugh Now, Cry Later was like the first time in a while I was like, yeah, okay. If this is where you are with it, but you're still doing the storytelling, still, jumping on dudes, you got your foot on dudes' necks when you're talking about certain things. It reminds me of why I liked Ice Cube. So Laugh Now, Cry Later was something that I was looking forward to. 2 years later, he released an album called Raw Footage. And I'm not going to hold y'all. I think I kind of slept on this album because it's straight jacket. It's straight jacket. I don't know if I didn't hear it or I skimmed through it or I only heard the singles. I feel like it's stronger and just similar to War and Peace Volume 2, where it's probably top heavy, but that's a double album. So those songs at the end don't matter as much. But I feel like with Raw Footage, it was a better album. And again, it contains some of those different versions of Ice Cube as far as the party side, which I don't really like as much, but it didn't dominate the album. There were just more records that reminded you of Ice Cube's social commentary, right? Maybe not as brash as earlier or controversial, some would say it's earlier, but still, it's 2008. The dude released his first solo in 1990. So it was a solid album and honestly exceeded my expectations in a lot of ways. Then he released an album 2 years later after that in 2010 that to me is one of the dopest album covers in his catalog, and that's I Am the West. When you look at his album covers, right, like America's Most Wanted has a dope album cover, Kill at Will is dope, Death Certificate is dope, like he's had some really dope. Laugh Now, Cry Later had a dope joint, and I Am the West look dope, but this album ain't dope. This album is yay. He has an album called I Am the West, and this is Ice Cube saying this in 2010. He on the cover with the old Western style looking with the gun in his hand, the way he said it just is dope, but it doesn't sound the way it looks. Given everything he's giving you in regards to West Coast gangster rap. Now, the reason why I say this album isn't that great, well, it's because I noticed a pattern with Ice Cube albums. First of all, I Am the West is not hardcore whatsoever. Ice Cube started making records that, and this is over time, but he started making records that mirrored the popular records of the time. Like if you go, like I said before, probably The Predator was the last time you felt like this is an Ice Cube album. You know what I'm saying? Whereas Death Certificate felt like, I'm not Death Certificate, Lethal Injection felt like there was some influences based off of what other West Coast artists were making, and he made some records, especially when you have a song like Today Was a Good Day being a huge hit. So when you make This Is, You Know How We Do It, I was gonna say this is how we do it. No, not that joint. But when you making records like that, you know how we do it, which feel more like that laid back, which I loved from West Coast hip hop in the 90s. But when you look at I'm the West, and that's what 2010, well, what was popping around that time? Well, trap music was popping. And there's a couple of records where the beats remind me of that. And Ice Cube doesn't sound good over them. And this is kind of like a, a, a thread through his career of albums where he's kind of adjusted to the times, but not to his benefits. What I noticed, and I'm going to talk a little bit more at the end, is he kind of tries to adapt his flow and it doesn't work. And I Am the West, it happens so many times where the feature sounds good over that beat, but Ice Cube doesn't to me. And the inflection changes in his voice, it just pulls you further and further away from who you knew. Um, so next up, also, this time it was 8 years after his last release. He released an album called Everything's Corrupt. And this album is Don Mega. It's not the worst thing in the world. I was highly anticipating this album because it felt like the buildup was taking you to a death certificate situation, and there are some records on there that are definitely Ice Cube's unique brand of social commentary when it comes to the music, but it doesn't, or the lyrics, but it doesn't match up with the production. You know what I'm saying? Like, I felt like the production in Death Certificate was so rooted in being like how we love Wu-Tang and be like, yo, the beats were gutter, or Boot Camp, right? The beats were gutter and it kind of matched the way they would rhyme and the way they look. But Ice Cube was so far removed from who he was on Death Certificate at this point that it just didn't come together in the way I think he was intending. I appreciate him trying to go that route, making a politically charged album, because I felt like, oh, Ice Cube make that? Okay, we back. But we wasn't. We were Don Mega. And recently, in 2024, and obviously pandemic probably played a role. He released an album called Man Down, which I listened to recently. And I'm not gonna hold you. It's Don Mega. It's Don Mega. And you know why? Because while there are records that remind you of that Ice Cube, and he's in pocket in the same ways, there's so many records that are more, and I'm not talking about the ego joint. I kind of like that one. The video made me like it, and it's kind of fun, and it kind of reminds me of how his videos used to have humor in the visuals, like Who's the Mac, right? It reminded me of that. So I didn't mind it as much because it was like, oh, it's kind of like Who's the Mac back in the days or whatever. But there's just so many records where he's trying things and his flow is not matching up. Like, he got this song with Knots, the beat is hot, but Ice Cube was like da 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 da. And some would argue, well, he's always rapped like that. Well, yeah, he has. But it's over specific production where it really works, where you don't hear the pattern as much. You just only hear his voice and the lyrics. And I know that sounds extra deep, but again, when he starts a solo career with 5 basically damn near perfect albums, it's hard to see where he lost it a little bit, considering I play some of his later albums much higher. You know what I'm saying? So to me, this is Ice Cube's career thus far, which is mostly great, right? Because, okay, you got 4 albums that weren't that good, but there's some joints on those albums. I bet if you took the best songs out of that Don Mega and Yay Yay catalog and put it on a playlist, somebody would say to themselves, Ice Cube's still doing it. But there's so many records that are just, he's just reaching with the flows, and he's trying to be up and party. And again, like I said, you go back to some of those albums during different times. Like I'll pick another time, like 98, right? A lot of what he was doing there, this is a shiny suit era time and all of that. And you could tell he was trying to match the energy of what was out at the time. But that's not what we like from Ice Cube. What we like from Ice Cube is what he's done with the classics. You can give us a funk jam here and there because we like those too. But man, give us that social commentary with the hardcore beats. And I think that's what's probably missing from some of his later albums is beats that sound dark and sinister. You know what I would love? If somehow somebody like a Havoc, who's made sinister beats a career, could make a couple of beats for Ice Cube, and who knows, maybe he did make one on here. But in the vein of a style that's more akin to West Coast hip hop, I would love that. If Easy Mo B can make Going Back to Cali for Biggie, and that you can't tell me somebody else from the West didn't make that, I would love someone who thinks like Havoc to have the subject matter of someone like an Ice Cube. Not saying only him, but that's what I mean. There's a part of me that misses that from Ice Cube, right? And we only get glimpses of it on these later albums, but a solid collection of music, again, from Ice Cube. What do you think about these Ice Cube albums? Would you have them ranked the same way? Would you change some things, bring something up, bring something down? Have you even heard all of these albums? I do these rankings most of the time by going back and listening to everything because honestly, there's only a few artists where I could do this as a blind test because I'd have every album. Ice Cube, I stopped with Lethal Injection, came back for Laugh Now, Cry Later, and now I'm just checking in as a fan. So leave your comments in the comment section below. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so we need your assistance in order to get this done and get it done properly. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic, I'm a fan. Peace.